Shabbat Shalom, everybody. Well, as you probably noticed this morning, there were 2 Torah scrolls on the bima, and the maftir, the reading for which page was called up, was very, very long. It was so long it took 2 people to share it. Substantially longer than the 3 verses that we normally read for a maftir. And as Rabbi Bernhard mentioned before the Torah reading, that is because we are in that run of 4 Shabbatot that are on the way to Pesach. Shabbat Shkalim, Shabbat Zachor, today Shabbat HaChodesh, the Shabbat of the month, which I'll talk about in a minute, and in a couple of weeks' time, Shabbat HaGadol, the big Shabbat, which is going to be with us soon. And today is named for that maftir, HaChodesh Hazeh Lachem, this month shall be for you, the head of the months, the first of the months of the year. And that long, long reading, having made that declaration, goes on to set up the very first Pesach as ever was, the Pesach in the land of Egypt that was marked by the children of Israel making markings on their homes, the angel of death going hippity-hop over their homes, as we tell at the Pesach Seder, and then a festival of 7 days of eating unleavened bread, which you will have noticed got into the supermarkets the day after Purim and is sitting there on the shelves beckoning us gently towards our annual round of indigestion. So my question for this morning, which I want to deal with briefly, is why does the commandment to have a calendar come up particularly now? What does that commandment have to do with the Pesach that is coming? And that's what I want to explore. So we begin by considering that commandment to have a calendar of any kind. Thou shalt have a calendar, and it shall be counted by months, which, by the way, is a crazy way to count a calendar because it means that you're always slightly off. The lunar year is 11 days shorter than the solar year, so your festivals slip and slide around, as indeed is the case with Ramadan in the Muslim calendar, which makes its way all the way around the year, sometimes in spring, sometimes in summer, sometimes in autumn, sometimes in winter. So to have a lunar calendar is slightly lunatic. Nonetheless, the rabbis of the Mishnah and the Talmud think of that commandment, you shall count time, as being the prototype commandment, and Rashi, our leading, well, don't tell the others I said so, but probably our leading medieval commentator, considers it as the real beginning of the Torah, although he makes a pretty good argument as to why we need a book and a half before it. And that commandment to count time becomes even more mysterious if you consider that Hebrew doesn't really have a word for time as such. Time in the sense of Stephen Hawking's A Brief History of Time, as this idea of something that is large and abstract and out there sloshing about, Hebrew doesn't have a word for that. It does have 3 words that get used for time, but each of those 3 words, the word zman, which gives us the Hebrew word hazmanah, or invitation, the word et, which is something more like an occurrence, and the word moed, which gives us both the words for committee and the words for community, are very specific, and they have to do with stuff happening and people getting together for it, not this sort of abstract physics-based commodity that is sloshing around out there being mysterious. Time, for the Jewish people, is what happens when people get together and make it happen. And perhaps this is why the starting point of the Jewish calendar, the celebration of Shabbat every week, is not something that we can work out where it is by looking up at the sky. Shabbat has to be counted. You count 7 days and then there's Shabbat. It's not a natural cycle. And elsewhere with the setting up of our calendar, we also resist the pull of nature. Like I said before, if you're going to give us a calendar with lunar months, then you would expect that we would observe that 29 or 30-day month, whatever it is, and let the festivals slip and slide. But we don't. We interfere. Pesach has to be in the spring. And so we have this remarkable arrangement of a 19-year cycle with 7 months with an extra year elsewhere in that cycle. And the next time you have insomnia, if you want to plug into Google Jewish lunar calendar piano keyboard, you will find that the pattern of black notes and white notes on a piano keyboard is closely related to where those leap years fall in a Jewish cycle. So there's some homework for you. And that blessing that we just made, the blessing for the new month, when the rabbis of the Talmud discuss that, well, that's another instance of the Jewish people getting involved with time. The discussion about what blessing you should say on Rosh Chodesh for the new month has some rabbis saying, well, blessed is the one who renews the months, which is logical, and another one is blessed be the one who consecrates the months. But it's the stream that says, blessed be the one who hallows Israel, that wins out. If the Jewish people are not counting the months, then the months don't happen at all. If a tree falls in a forest with nobody to hear it, etc., etc. People make time happen. That's the first lesson of the maftir of today. It's people who create time, not the other way about. We matter. But there's a second lesson. The first of the month, as we know, is marked by the crescent this way, that tiny sliver of the new moon appearing in the sky. Here in California, you see a phenomenon that you don't get in England, where I grew up, which is that you can sometimes see that sliver holding the rest of the moon. Have you seen that? It's like, there's a very famous ballad called The Ballad of Sir Patrick Spens. It was regarded as being a bad sign to see the new moon holding the old moon in her arms. But you see it quite often over here, and so far nothing desperately disastrous has happened. So maybe the ballad was wrong. But we see the moon as a crescent in the sky, and then we see it appear to grow until it becomes this big round shining thing. And then after that, we see it diminish until it disappears, and so begins a new month. But I want to point out that that is not what is happening in the sky. That's not what's happening from the moon's point of view. From the point of view of the moon, when we can't see it, the sun is illuminating it completely. When it begins to move into its own orbit, a shadow falls on it, diminishing it. It gets further and further away from the sun. We see it, but the moon to itself is at its furthest from the sun when it is at its fullest for us. And then gradually the process reverses itself until once again the moon is invisible. And the Lubavitcher Rebbe noticed this. He noticed this paradox of the moon being at its brightest when we, human beings, can't see it. And he teaches us that there's a lesson there for our own lives. He suggests that when our lives seem to be at their darkest, we are in fact the closest that we can be to God, to the source of our vitality. From the moon's perspective, that darkness that we perceive is the warmest and brightest point in its own cycle. And this is a challenging idea to get hold of. But the point, I think, is a really profound point. We are human and we are ephemeral. And like the moon, we are continually subject to change. And our darkness is not a continual darkness. But it might be easier for us to bear the difficult and dark times in our lives if we think of them not as a factor of our distance from the source of our vitality, but in fact a function of being extremely close, perhaps too close, to that source. So what do those two things have to teach us about the Pesach that is coming? Two lessons, I think. And the first is a lesson for the community, and the second is a lesson that operates at the deepest level of the individual. We've seen that the Jewish calendar establishes the rhythms of communal time, time being what we create together, as I said. And if you think about it, the Passover Seder, the Pesach Seder, is predicated on community. It's not something that we do alone. It's not only the people who are sitting around the table, but it's the concentric circles of the people who are hungry outside the door, who we invite in to be with us, and the wider circle yet of the invitation to the prophet Elijah, and by implication to the Messiah, to join our celebration. The freedom that we are about to celebrate is a communal freedom, one in which a whole nation was released from the shackles of slavery, and communal time is the time that we count and the time that does count. But today's Haftarah is also teaching us the converse. It's teaching us something about the process of individual fluctuation and renewal. This is a time of the year where we focus on things that are new. The trees have just come into blossom. There's a special once-a-year blessing that we make on them. The Hebrew word chodesh is related to the root chadash, which means to be new. And another Hasidic teacher, the Sfat Emet, teaches us that, yes, we observe Rosh Hashanah, the beginning of the year, in the fall, but we're only observing the beginning of our physical creation, the creation of the world at that point. Our spiritual creation, our spiritual point of origin is now, right now, this point in the year, this point of the Pesach story. And one function of being human is our capability to start over. At any point, at any moment, we can make that decision inside to change our thoughts, our behavior, our attitudes, the quality of our relationships. And that ability to choose individually what we are going to do and the way we are going to walk is perhaps the greatest freedom of all. And so there are two lessons to take away from today. To look outward into the community in preparation for the Passover that is coming, and to look inside to our own hearts, preparing ourselves both for the changes that we wish to make and the celebration that is coming. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.